Over 80% of people with disabilities use an assistive device, and 27% need at least one more, often citing cost as a barrier. Makers Making Change is helping bridge that gap. Our community of volunteers design and build assistive technologies you can download and request on our website. If you're looking for a solution, you can browse through our wide variety of devices, like simple bottle openers, assistive switches, and even more high-tech options like adapted toys and the lip sync. Once you've submitted a request, a volunteer maker will respond and collaborate with you to build the device. The best part of this volunteer platform is that you only pay for the cost of materials, no markups, and no inventory fees. Want to volunteer? We're open to makers of any skill level. Learn more and join the movement today at makersmakingchange.com.
Hey everyone, and welcome to MMC Live. We host an episode of MMC Live every month, and every once in a while we'll be here talking about accessible gaming. My name's Tyler, I'm the accessible gaming lead for Makers Making Change, and I have Josie here with me, who's one of our mechanical engineers, also works on the gaming work and our engineering team. So today, since this is our first gaming episode, we're going to give a brief kind of overview of our program, how to make games accessible, and then we're going to end by sharing some of our fall game recommendations. In future lives, we'll be doing more of like a little news update on what's been going on in game accessibility and any new kind of tech and resources and stuff that have come out, in case you missed them or you want to hear from us kind of our perspective on it. But other than that, we're just going to keep rolling through here into overview of our program. So kind of taking like a big picture look at our accessible gaming program, one of the big things is answering this question of where do we start, from clinicians or gamers individually, game developers, variety of different people that are asking us that question, and then meeting those needs with assistive technology, so things like modified controllers, assistive switches, a bunch of different things. And the main way that we actually help people create their own accessible gaming spaces is through something we call our Game Checkpoints program. So we'll go all through this soon, but kind of go on to the next piece here of really expanding onto that. What is our role in gaming? So answering that question, I don't know where to start. We'll focus first on the gamer piece, but again, gamers, accessible gaming spaces through our checkpoints work, working with the game industry, and providing that low-cost hardware. So with gamers, we can work with people with disabilities in Canada that want to either get into gaming for the first time, or maybe they've had an injury and their gaming looks different now, whether they can't use a controller or whatever that is. We want to look at what can they do, what inputs do they have, and match them with the assistive technology that's going to allow them to game the way they want to. So we have a bunch of different ways that we can do that in virtually, or if you're near one of our offices in Calgary or in Burnaby in Vancouver, we're able to help assess you locally there too. So taking a look next here on the low-cost hardware side. So again, things like alternative inputs, which we classify as like assistive switches and joysticks, sip and puff technology, facial expressions, all those different things. Josie will get into more detail later. That's a big thing that we are providing on the assistive tech side. The other side of that is the accessible controllers. So that would or modified controllers. So you'd be taking like a like the photo here, like Joy-Con set, and you're adding 3D prints to make that, more accessible for someone who may not be able to reach those back triggers, or something where you're attaching to a controller to be, make the controller one-handed or easier to hold, or those kind of things you can do with 3D printing. And a really big thing here is accessible joysticks, kind of a highlight of the impact of this work. When we first were exploring adaptive gaming a couple years ago, we found that accessing joysticks in Canada was nearly impossible, and if it was very expensive. You were looking at somewhere in that like $300, a minimum price of about $300 for a joystick in Canada, that would work with Xbox adapter controller and other components. So we got grant funding from the Canadian government to develop various styles and kind of setups of different adaptive joysticks with different toppers and a bunch of different things there too. So just kind of showing that highlight of some of the work that we do. They can all be used as mouse controllers as well too. Yeah, in the accessible gaming spaces, yeah, this is our game checkpoints program. We have 9 game checkpoints across Canada as of now. And what we do in this program is really kind of help support centers, whoever they are, create an adaptive gaming space. And yeah, those are kind of, the big names of the centers and the sponsors and stuff that helped us, do this work. Obviously, thank you to everyone on the, kind of represented on the screen here for, allowing us to, work with you and help support gamers in your community. So yeah, so thinking about kind of how we start this gaming program or gaming process when we start the game checkpoint is we need to start with funding. Where are we going to get the dollars and cents to be able to get the the consoles, the controllers, the games, all those different assistive technologies into the center? So whether we have grant funding at the moment or the center has grant funding, we'll work with them to source those materials, get them delivered to the center. Then we'll do training. So in person end up being around like 6 to 8 hours. Sometimes that's split up in multiple days. And we can go into the center and go from everything from turning on an Xbox all the way to creating an adaptive setup for someone in your community. And then building that internal community of game checkpoints as well too. So we have quarterly meetings that are virtual with all the different centers and all the different game checkpoints, where that we can kind of give them an update on what new things have come up, how they can apply it to their practice, and various pieces like that. And then they have a Discord together too, where they can communicate asynchronously and be able to discuss opportunities for improvement or things that they learn that they want to share with other centers to help prevent the siloing that can happen. And when we think about these accessible gaming spaces, oftentimes I talk about them from a clinical perspective, but we do have game checkpoints, and we want more and more game checkpoints that are more in community centers. So think about libraries, other nonprofits, game developers even that can support this. So why are we doing this? Why are we making these spaces? The 2 big reasons are the significance of gaming and cost of gaming. So thinking about the significance of gaming here, we got a big one is decreasing the social isolation that can happen for folks with disabilities and are disproportionately affected. So think about the process of adaptive sports, for example. That's something that has been around for a while now, and in clinical centers, if someone was an athlete and then had an injury, getting back into sports, there is it's maybe not perfectly linear, but there is a process for someone to get back into sports through adaptive sports. And we have to think about that same thing for gaming, where maybe gaming was a big part of someone's life or community before an injury, or they never had access to that community because it wasn't accessible before. So providing those options for those people in these centers to be able to customize, learn about their setup, and know kind of what's right for them. And the other big one's cost of gaming. So all the work that we do at Makers Making Change is trying to help lower that barrier of cost. Gaming is particularly difficult because we have the cost of games and gaming themselves. It's it's an expensive hobby. You got consoles costing like $700-ish, games costing $80 each, and then assistive technology is also expensive. So trying to lower that cost with the assistive technology for someone, because if just one person is looking at one setup individually, like for them, you're looking at about somewhere around $3,000 just for that one setup, which not a lot of people have $3,000 they can just drop on a big hobby like that. And oftentimes they may not know if that $3,000 worth of gear will work if they don't have the opportunity to trial it before and figure out what's right for them. And a center could cost over $10,000 for them to get all that range of gear to actually do this work. So helping lower the entry for centers to do this as well. We have a bunch of resources online as well on adaptive gaming. So on the right picture on the screen there, if you go to our Makers Making Change website, on the top bar there's an adaptive gaming tab. So if you click on that, you'll be able to see like a 4-part article series that's just kind of an introduction into gaming and adaptive gaming, what technologies out there, what games are good, and really highlighting those resources that are already out there from places like Special Effect and Able Gamers and Can I Play That, and sharing those out. The other resource that we have is our Game Checkpoint resource. So if you're looking to create your own accessible gaming space, or you think these things could benefit the work that you do, or you're curious, with our open source kind of motive and work moving forward, we want to make sure that all those resources that we help get the Game Checkpoint started are also open source. So we have things like reference guides, a big material like a spreadsheet of of all of the different materials that we'd recommend for a center to get started as a Game Checkpoint, some questionnaires that we use before a client gets into a gaming session to figure out what abilities they have, what genres they want, and kind of everything you need there. And everything's all templated as well too. So if you wanted to take those and expand upon them and all those things, we love to see that. This is a good example here of some of those resources online are these Game Checkpoint booklets. So kind of these are intended more as like a guide during a session. So instead of having to have clinicians have to go Google or research or do some other type of information search for to figure out how to maybe connect an Xbox controller to a PlayStation console or vice versa or whatever that is. We have a booklet reference to be able to quickly identify what to do, how to do it. Gaming basics, training on 10 games that we thought hit good genres, and have good accessibility in them as well too. And then a big really great list on best practices, so kind of a whole flow chart of like start to finish of getting an accessible gaming setup, what best practices we've developed through that. So in the first year of the Game Checkpoints program, it's just been over a year now. We've served over 200 gamers through the Game Checkpoints program. We have 9 checkpoints. We started with initial 4, so in early 2023. So expanding us up to 9 is a big indicator that this is a really important and needed program in lots of centers across Canada. And then within those centers, so they have their initial intake. Sometimes they do recreation gaming sessions as well too, or follow-up sessions. All of those total result in 448 gamer sessions, which was shows the massive amount of work that goes into this, from the clinician or from the educator side, the Game Checkpoint lead side. And this also helps us get increased feedback on the gaming devices that we're building, like the joysticks, where we can send it to these centers and say, hey, what do you think about this? With the gaming population that you have, and we can continue to make things more user driven. And the final piece here on the game industry, we've been doing more and more of this now. And really what this is around is making sure that games are accessible from the start. So there's been a huge movement of accessibility in games for several years now. GA Conf is a good place to look to every year. It's like GA Conf, it's a conference every year that does kind of showcases all the work that happens in game accessibility. And one thing that we're trying to help the game developers do is train them on the assistive technology that someone maybe use playing their game, and when they do play testing, so when they're trialing their game with users, that they're bringing in more people with disabilities into that play testing who may be using assistive technology or non-standard controls to play their game. Yeah, that's kind of like an overview of what we do in gaming, and kind of answering that question, how do I start? And I'll pass over to Josie to do the how to make games accessible.
Hello. So now that we've talked a bit about the work that we do in adaptive gaming, I'm going to go over a brief overview of ways to adapt a gaming setup to make it more accessible for someone. So a gaming setup typically consists of a gaming platform such as PC, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, along with a game and some form of controls. So when we talk about making gaming more accessible, we focus on the way that the player interacts with the game through the 3 categories in the blue rectangle. So that's modified controllers, alternate access, and software. The assistive technology is then connected to the gaming platform and used by the player. So let's dive into these 3 main ways of adapting a gaming setup. And we're going to start with switch and alternative access. So alternative access basically means taking the traditional controls for a game, such as a mouse and keyboard or a standard handheld controller, and replacing those controls or using them alongside with adaptive switches, joysticks, sip and puff devices, or other physical alternative devices. So here we can see a setup of someone that is playing Brawlhalla on a mobile device. And so we have an Xbox adaptive controller and some switches and joysticks, as well as a 3D printed phone stand. So then these devices are all plugged into the top of the Xbox adaptive controller, basically plugged into their associated controls into like X, Y, A, and right bumper. And then the joystick is plugged into X1 to get joystick movement. This basically allows for the different access points that are needed to play this game and greatly reduces the cost. So the XAC itself has most of the cost, and then those DIY components are only about $50. So when we talk about kind of using switches with gaming, we need something in between that kind of bridges that gap. So that is where switch interfaces come into play. So at Makers Making Change, we make a switch interface called the Forest Hub that can be used for gaming, for PC gaming specifically. And then Nintendo makes a controller called the HoriFlex. Microsoft makes the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which works on Xbox natively, and the Sony makes the PlayStation Access Controller. And these all allow these assistive switches to be plugged in and used for your game. Next, we're going to talk about modified controllers. So modified controllers are basically exactly that. They're modifications that can be made to standard controllers or mice and keyboards to make them more accessible for the users. This basically allows for limitless creativity, but it does require design skills in order to customize that for the person's needs. A few examples here, we have a one-handed switch adapter. In the middle, we have for an Xbox controller, an adaptation that sort of spreads out all the buttons so that they're further apart and easier if you have limited dexterity. And then on the last one is a trigger extender for an Xbox controller. So here we have the PlayStation one-handed modification. So you can see how the person is able to control the left joystick just by moving that entire controller around through that adapter. So when it comes to modified controllers, there might be a modification that is for a certain kind of gaming controller that isn't the system that you are using for gaming. So say the PlayStation adaptation really worked well for you, but you're gaming on Xbox, that's where adapters come into play. So that's where we can take an adapter that can sort of trick your console into thinking you're using the controller that's native for that system. So here's sort of a table of a list of these different adapters, and you can also find them in our gaming resources. Another form of modified controller is a modification that allows you to mount the controller. So here we have for RAM mount system, we have a snap-on modification that allows you to mount your Xbox controller more easily. The way to do this before having this 3D printed adapter was just sort of using a plate with Velcro, but this is a lot more stable and rigid. And lastly, we're going to talk about software. There's two main ways that we can do this, either through in-game settings or through third-party software. So here on the right, you can see a screenshot from The Last of Us Part 2. And in this first picture, it's kind of hard to see where the people are. They kind of blend in with the background. So they added a high contrast mode. Here you can see the people in the frame a lot more easily. And you can also tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys through the blue and red color coding. Next here, we have an example of slow motion mode. So the player is moving, and here you can see they're in slower motion. That makes it easier for sort of if you have a longer reaction time to be able to play the game. So some ways that you can find games that have good accessibility settings, you can look on the website Can I Play That? They have articles on game accessibility from disabled gamers. And then there's also the Family Gaming Database. They document the accessibility features in each game, and they also have a specific like accessibility setting that sort of breaks down the different modes when it comes to like visual, audio, and all those different kind of types of accessibility settings. You can also pick from a list of common features and find games that way too. So I talked about these kind of each separately, but in reality, when we're setting up a gaming setup for someone, you're going to be using a combination of these different uh, sort of modes of accessibility. So you might be using switch and alternative access along with using software to use slow motion, because that would allow you to reach your switches a bit more easily. So here's an example of someone that is using multiple of these forms of accessibility at once. So you can see that they are using a standard controller, and at the same time, they're playing in Copilot with their Xbox adaptive controller and some switches and a joystick. You can see they're able to reach some of the buttons on the standard controller, but then are using the adaptive controller and assistive switches to expand their number of inputs.
Yeah, and there's lots of people in this space doing this work too. It's not just us. I mean, we're the folks in Canada that are supporting Canadian gamers, of course, but there's lots of people that have done this work before as well too. So I mean, Able Gamer has been around for 20 years now, I believe. They're the kind of main charity in the U.S. Focusing on accessible gaming. Special Effect is another one that's been around for a long time too. They're based in the UK and sometimes serve outside of Europe, if I'm understanding, or outside of the UK into Europe, if I'm understanding that correctly. They have a fantastic resource page called Game Access, so they keep that up, really good up to date resources on new tech that comes out, new game accessibility, and kind of step by step process of how to use those. So definitely recommend trying that out. And Fly Lilo is international, kind of no borders associated with that nonprofit. They're a little bit newer and are also doing some good work in creating different devices for gaming to be accessible and providing centers with gear and a bunch of other stuff too. A couple other photos, some other folks have been doing this for a long time, doing some really great work. Definitely not a full photo list here. There's so many people that we could shout out, but people like Barry at One Switch, Gaming Readapted, the Controller Project, and yeah, ton of folks that are doing some really great work.
So to end our live stream, since tomorrow's Halloween and we're talking about gaming, we want to end us off with 2 autumn and Halloween inspired game recommendations. So my game recommendation is Night in the Woods. It's an adventure game that focuses on exploration and meeting characters as you advance through the story. You play as a cat named May who just dropped out of college and returned to her hometown. The game starts out with sort of cozy fall vibes with the fallen leaves and fall colors in a really beautiful art style, and then gets a bit spooky as you go on. In the game, you'll run around exploring the town of Possum Springs and meeting all the characters that live there, catching up with old friends, and uncovering some mysteries, all while May and her family and friends learn what it means to grow up. I'm only a few hours into this game so far, but I'm like really excited to finish playing. It's available on all major gaming platforms, and the ESRB rating is teen. For the controls, all you need is the left joystick or D-pad along with 3 buttons. Since it's a 2D platformer game, you don't have to worry about kind of controlling your second joystick and adjusting the camera and perspective. Holding buttons and rapid repeated pressing are also optional, which is helpful. So there's no really fast rapid fire button mashing, and there's also no simultaneous button presses required to advance through the game. The game is slow paced and low pressure. There are a few mini games that do have some fast paced timing elements, but luckily you don't actually have to do them to advance through the game. There is also no spoken dialogue or audio cues, so you can play with the audio off or without hearing. All text is large and high contrast, and interactive game elements are also large. The game also helps you along if you get stuck, which prevents some accessibility barriers like quick button sequences from getting in the way of progressing through the game. To learn more about the accessibility of this game, you can read the article on the Family Gaming Database and Can I Play That?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Josie. I love the art style of that game. I'm gonna be recommending Alan Wake 2. I've had it on my list forever to play, but kind of finally decided to jump in now that it's fall and you got the horror vibe and all those different things. And I'm also only a few hours in, but I've been loving it so much that I just had to include it here. There is Alan Wake 1 as well. Like it's a sequel game, which I played and really liked too, but if you don't want to go back through and play the game, or if the accessibility features aren't there for you to play it. There's lots of YouTube videos that kind of recap that. But yeah, Alan Wake 2 is fantastic. A game follows two characters, Alan, who's a writer trapped in an alternate reality, and Saga, who's an FBI agent, and their stories kind of cross over, and the whole thing has got this like dark, eerie atmosphere and kind of really neat artistic takes on lots of things that's pretty refreshing in games. And if you're into horror or mystery thriller type things, you'll love it for sure. In terms of controls and accessibility and all those things, definitely it is a horror game, and it's rated M. So if you're not into those things, try to avoid this one. It's available on Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC. And the controls use basically every control in a standard controller. So you got two joysticks with multiple buttons, but there's been a new update recently on October 22nd with a ton of new accessibility features. So things like infinite ammo, autocomplete for quick time events, quick turn, and those kind of things. So you still are using a lot of buttons on it, but for activities or inputs in the game that would have required a little bit more dexterity or fast type of rapid presses now aren't there as much anymore, at least, and you're able to kind of get a little bit of a deeper dive into the accessibility on some of the updates that they provided there too. So
that game looks way too scary for me.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. I actually don't like scary movies, but I really do like scary games. I don't know what that is, but yeah, it's good. So yeah, that's it. That's all we got today for today's episode of MMC Live. Thanks so much for joining us, and don't forget we'll be back in November with our R&D team that's going to dive into the work that we do to create low-cost, open-source assistive technology. Until then, happy gaming, and we'll see you next time.